Dr. Vegapunk never actually turned Kuma into a cyborg, because in reality, he turned him into a god. It's finally time to put one of the longest-running mysteries in One Piece to bed. By the end of this video, you'll never wonder what really happened between Vegapunk and Bartholomew Kuma again. After all, we know exactly why Vegapunk, a man highly sympathetic to the Revolutionary Army, agreed to turn one of their strongest members into an unfeeling killing machine. And even why Kuma agreed to the deadly procedure in the first place. Not only do we have all the answers, but they shed light on a whole new mystery from the current arc, and provide setup for a fate even worse than eating a defective smile fruit. Kuma the Tyrant. Bartholomew Kuma was once the king of the Sorbet Kingdom. Popular opinion later painted him as a tyrant overthrown by his people, but we all know how much the world government likes to bend the truth when they can't straight up erase it. Kuma was a close friend of the world's worst criminal, Monkey D. Dragon. Commander Lindbergh even called the Sorbet Kingdom an allied nation of the Revolutionary Army. It seems more likely that the world government spread lies about the former monarch because he worked with these subversive terrorists. In fact, they may have removed him themselves. It wouldn't be the first time a popular revolt was used as a cover for a takeover in One Piece. At some point, he was expelled from the throne of Sorbet. The timeline is a bit hazy here, but we know Kuma was also one of the founders of Dragon's Revolutionary Army. Early on, he served as one of the Master Rebels' key lieutenants alongside Emporio Ivankov, though it's unclear if he was still the king of Sorbet at that time. Regardless, somewhere down the line, things went very, very wrong. The world government seems to have acquired some powerful leverage against Bartholomew Kuma. Perhaps they threatened his beloved kingdom, or maybe it was more personal, something targeting his wife or daughter, for example. Whatever the root cause, Kuma made a deal with the world government. He'd allow Vegapunk to turn him into a cyborg, replacing body parts one by one. By the end of the process, he'd be a living weapon, a tool for the world government's tyrannical figures to use against those who dared to defy them. This creation, the Pacifista, was so successful that it not only led to a whole line of Kuma-based robotic soldiers, but ultimately resulted in the creation of the Seraphim, a new generation of Pacifista who are set to replace the warlords entirely. Vegapunk believes that these are the most powerful beings to have ever roamed the seas. But in a bit, you'll understand that these little angels are nothing compared to the god that Kuma has now become. But creating a massive army of Terminator robots wearing bear ear bucket hats doesn't exactly fit with what we know of Kuma or Vegapunk. It makes a little more sense for the big guy. The former king hated the world government with a passion, but there are plenty of possibilities as to why he agreed to sacrifice himself. But what could have led to Vegapunk suggesting the Pacifista project? The doctor worked for the government out of necessity. He needed funding for research, and the world government was the only party wealthy enough to pay him. He didn't agree with their tyranny, but wanted to try and reason with the Navy. Kuma's cyberization and loss of free will don't seem like ideas he'd have just thrown out there for the sake of it. They're cruel, inhumane, and wrong. Add to that the fact that he'd be going after a close friend of Dragon's, a man he genuinely liked. The whole thing just seems off. But who else would have been crazy enough to think of creating a legion of cyborg super soldiers? This doesn't sound like an idea the 5 old fogies would have just come up with themselves. Admiral Fujitora was involved in the later creation of the Seraphim, but he wasn't with the Navy when the Pacifista project started. Something is wrong here. What led to the Pacifista project being suggested in the first place? Well, what if it was part of some bigger scheme? A master plan, years in the making, between Vegapunk and Kuma to turn the tables on the world government forever. That's right. Their plan to defeat the gods of the One Piece world was to create a god of their very own. Vegapunk's secret ally. The Straw Hats recently arrived on Egghead Island, Vegapunk's home base, and we've seen a ton of game-changing things. CP0 has been sent to kill the greatest scientist in the world because the 5 elders fear he may one day turn against them. In his effort to escape, Vegapunk has contacted a mysterious ally on the island. His apprentice/other self, Vegapunk Edison, objected to this plan out of worry for this shadowy friend of theirs. They'd have nowhere left to hide if they're in the government sights too. Someone is hiding out on Egghead. Someone who Vegapunk feels like he owes a debt to and is nervous about putting at risk. This isn't some new scientific creation of his or an innocent bystander with no past to speak of. But in turn, when the original Vegapunk asks for help, this mystery figure is all too happy to oblige. They even admit that they were expecting this request to come sooner or later. There's a lot of room to theorize about this new shadowy ally of Team Vegapunk. Fans have thrown around loads of speculation and theories as to who this might be. Even Marines like Smoker and Fujitora have been suggested. Some think that the shape of the Denden Mushi suggests the triumphant return of Doflamingo, having broken out of jail off-panel. Others point to the mysterious unknown woman who once was part of Mads to suggest that Stussy and Vegapunk are former colleagues, and that she's about to turn against Cypherpole. None of these ideas are bulletproof, however. Some, despite sounding pretty cool, are nothing compared to the secrets we've got coming up. Stussy hasn't had room to take a call, with Kaku and Lucci sticking close by her at all times. How could she have received Vegapunk's message without the other two hearing her? Doflamingo hiding in a quiet corner of the island seems pretty unlike him. Even before you get into how relying on someone else for concealment is borderline out of character, he's got friends elsewhere. Doflamingo can be deceptive, but this level of stealth requires a sense of humility that's utterly foreign to the heavenly demon. Maybe you think we've hit a brick wall here. If you do, maybe you're just not a plot army soldier yet, and so you've made the mistake of doubting our deductive skills. But once you see the light, be sure to subscribe to the channel. After all, Edison's words give us another identifying factor. He does not doubt this ally's power. He's absolutely convinced that they could help Team Vegapunk against CP0. His only objection is that they're being unfair to their friend. So, our mysterious figure is someone with extreme strength hiding on Egghead Island. The Revolutionary Army members are all accounted for, aside from Sabo. Kaido and Big Mom are gone, while Teach and Shanks are out at sea. Law is having to deal with Blackbeard, and Kid just reached Elbaf. There are significantly fewer powerful pirates at large right now than there used to be. Unless this mystery figure is an out-of-nowhere pick like Captain Arouge or Golden Lion Shiki, it's probably not a pirate. But finally, we have the one figure that we've met who fits all these criteria perfectly. An extremely powerful man who owes Vegapunk a debt and whose very existence the Punk team would be very hesitant to reveal. Bartholomew Kuma. Okay, now some of you are probably tearing us a new world in the comments already. After all, we saw Kuma in Redport in the exact same chapter as this reveal. But although impressive, this cybernetic attacker is not the Bartholomew Kuma The God we're getting to. This is Bartholomew Kuma The Man. It's just his shell, the PX0 Pacifista made out of his body. Given Kuma's unexpected arrival at the base of Mary Joie, it's likely the PX0 is currently being used to distract the world government as part of Vegapunk's efforts to escape Egghead. An attack on the gateway to Mary Joie would draw a strong naval response, diverting ships that Kizaru was planning to use to cut off the Straw Hat crew's escape. As Shaka notes, the only priority is getting the Stella body off the island. Everything and everyone else is expendable in the course of accomplishing that goal. This would be sad if any trace of Kuma's sentience remained within the machine, but as we've seen repeatedly, there really isn't. Even once the revolutionaries got him out of Mary Joie, all PX0 could do was ask for new orders. This infuriated the revolutionaries, who are naturally inclined to view this as their dear friend being stripped of all emotion. That's the same line of thinking Bonnie is driven by. They view this like an injury and treat it in binary terms, when the truth is anything but, believing that Vegapunk hurt Kuma so he can undo the harm and make him better. Or he can't, in which case he essentially killed him. But what if we told you that the truth is somewhere in the middle, like the red line? Bartholomew Kuma The God. The cyberization process was gradual. Kuma had been replaced piece by piece with only his head remaining intact. That was the final change Dr. Vegapunk made to turn him from a human to a pacifista. From there, all that's left is the living weapon. However, this is where Kuma's friends are making a bit of an assumption. Instead of injuring the brain by slicing bits out of it or whatever, what if Vegapunk simply removed it? That's far from impossible in the world of One Piece. Law's proven himself more than capable of transplanting people's personalities from one body to another thanks to his devil fruit, the Ope Ope no Mi. Vegapunk lacks that specific devil fruit ability, but has one of his own that seems extremely relevant here. The Nomi Nomi no Mi gives him the ability to grow a seemingly unlimited amount of brain matter. That's how Vegapunk was able to create Punk Records. He's clearly experienced in dealing with brains. What if the fruit gave him more abilities than that? I mean, it's a paramecia fruit. Within their domain, their powers can be quite broad. But can it really be that simple? There's clearly some sort of brain still in the pacifista, something to drive it forward. It's just lacking in free will and is only able to obey orders. But perhaps the Nomi Nomi could allow Vegapunk to create a new, simpler bit of brain matter to drive the cyborg. He could have even just left technology in there, completely roboticizing the pacifista thought process. And Kuma? He'd still be alive. Vegapunk was able to take a big chunk of his own brain out without issue and use it to create Punk Records. What would stop him from keeping Kuma's disembodied brain alive? With how much Egghead Island has embraced a retro sci-fi aesthetic, it would make sense to see the brain in a jar trope. It's one of the oldest in science fiction. If this is correct, then Vegapunk suggested the Pacifista Project as a way out for Kuma. The world government already wanted him dead, and if he continued fighting with the Revolutionary Army, they'd probably do something horrible to the people he cared about. But Vegapunk could give them what they wanted without costing the big guy his life. The Celestial Dragons now have Kuma as an obedient puppet. There's no need for them to retaliate against the Sorbet Kingdom, Bonnie, or anyone else. Meanwhile, Vegapunk would keep Kuma with him on Egghead. They'd hide the real king of Sorbet from the world government, work on some new identity for him, or give him a new home until Dragon finally managed to bring down the Navy. In the meantime, this would go a long way toward proving Vegapunk's loyalty to his new paymasters. He was a former member of MADS after all. The Marines must have had doubts about this one-time criminal scientist. After this, though, Vegapunk was was approved to develop some of the Navy's most powerful weapons. And, perhaps more importantly, he put himself in their command hierarchy. He'd have actual power within the world government and could install some backdoors, like the one that's probably now driving PX-0 to attack Redport. Vegapunk would finally get the power to help defend himself against the world government, an organization he's never exactly trusted. It all lines up, and explains the other Vegapunk's reluctance to call on their mystery ally. Vegapunk tried to keep the original Kuma secret, both for his own sake and that of the Sorbet Kingdom. But now, with Egghead under attack, that may no longer be feasible. Thus, Vegapunk Stella asks the former warlord to step in and save him from CP0's assault, presumably piloting a new pacifista. This is a pretty enticing answer, in part because it means everything can be settled neatly. A happy ending is totally in the cards here. All Vegapunk would need to do is clone a new body for Kuma. The pacifistas are expensive, each one costing as much as a battleship, but this seems very achievable. It'd give Bonnie her dad back, safe and sound. No harm, no foul. Except, there's one fatal flaw with this idea, which turns a potential happy reunion into something extremely bittersweet. Spoiler alert, it's probably why Kuma used to always carry a Bible around everywhere he went. A truth that is difficult to accept. This whole idea that Kuma is basically alive and can easily be restored is the best kind of lie. A tempting one. So it's no surprise that the theory is pretty popular within the fandom. Everyone wants to believe Kuma can come back and that Vegapunk can restore his free will. They want to see him overcome the world government shackles and join the good guys in fighting against the forces of tyranny. There's just one problem though. Vegapunk has confirmed that he can't do that. Even with Bonnie pointing a sword at him and threatening his life, the old man admitted that he can't just restore Kuma to normal. Even when she's no longer conscious, Vegapunk feels that Bonnie's hatred for him is reasonable, and he seems quite deeply upset about what happened. If the real Kuma is just lying around somewhere off-screen, this reaction doesn't make much sense. Why would Vegapunk not just explain that he's effectively still alive? He should be able to bring Bonnie back to her father and solve things. Someone is bound to claim that this is an exact word situation, with the old doctor focusing on the fact that he can restore Kuma's original body. Vegapunk's perfectionist nature has been established through his irritation at the pink version of Kaido's devil fruit he'd made. Logically, he might overreact to some slight issue that would make Kuma's new body less than perfect, or be focused on the fact that he can't restore Kuma's human body. Except, even that doesn't really fit here. The clone bodies are visually identical to the original. No one was able to recognize them prior to the Pacifista project becoming public knowledge. If Kuma's brain is still within Egghead, Vegapunk should be able to restore him pretty easily. As much of a perfectionist as the old man is, this should be a viable way to bring Kuma back. If it's not, then perhaps the operation to transplant Kuma was more one way than Vegapunk wanted. Even for the far future science of Egghead Island, this may have been tricky. Vegapunk himself can't make a perfect duplication and transfusion. We know because if he could, we'd have likely seen it with the satellite bodies, yet they're all so different. So, what did he do? Instead of simply removing Kuma's physical brain and putting it in a jar, perhaps he's had to transcribe Kuma. Vegapunk could have read the contents of his brain and copied that information to a new storage medium. That should be achievable for someone with devil fruit-powered mastery of the brain, even without Vegapunk's advanced science. The little gray cells are ultimately a storage medium, and the satellite bodies have been able to access information stored within Punk records. So perhaps that's all Kuma is now. Information, a copy of the man created by the Nomi Nomi fruit. He'd basically be an artificial intelligence contained within Egghead's defense systems, or locked up in Punk records. He still exists in some fashion. He can take a Denden Mushi call from Vegapunk Stella, but he can't regain his physical form. Transporting him off the island will likely prove difficult. Even with Kuma able to help engage CP0, he may be limited to activating static defenses, like the hologram projectors or the Frontier Dome. Vegapunk doesn't even mention the idea of taking their ally with them. Would they be forced to leave him behind? Beyond that, however, the whole idea of this copy technique raises some worrying questions of its own. Is a duplication of the original person's mind the same thing as the original? How much of Kuma was Vegapunk able to preserve? We've even heard some interesting thoughts on this question from Punk Atlas. When introduced to her, we saw the young Punk was able to touch holograms, projections that seemed intangible to Luffy and the gang. She tried to explain it to Luffy. Perception shapes your sense of reality, but touching a projected object turns that on its head, doesn't it? So that girl isn't real? Debates on what makes something real are as old as time. It's something you'll have to decide for yourself, but I consider the matter settled. If Vegapunk made a holographic copy of Kuma, would it be the real Kuma? If it were just the image standing there, you'd probably say no. It's just an illusion, right? But imagine if it had all the memories of the original. Imagine if you could touch it. Would the copy be Kuma? How perfect does a recreation have to be for you to consider it the original? What makes it Kuma? You may perceive the image and see the man, but does that make it true? This question is echoed in an old and appropriately nautical philosophical dilemma. The ancient Greeks proposed the concept of the ship of Theseus. If you replace every component part of a thing, is it still the original? There's no real answer to that question, but it explains why Vegapunk's been feeling so guilty about this. Even if he were able to somewhat save Kuma, he may not be able to restore his old body or even recreate his mind. Anything less than perfection would be eating the Doctor up inside. No matter what the circumstances, this was his idea. Any suffering on Kuma's part, any sort of loss of identity, would be something Vegapunk would take extremely personally. I mean, would a transcribed Kuma even have a soul? That's certainly the sort of question that might make someone want to pick up a Bible, huh? But hey, maybe it's not that bleak. Oda is known to have characters cheat death in various ways. The preserved Kuma mostly being his old self is possible. But don't think for a second that Oda is above such tragic realities. Remember those smile-affected villagers on Wano? They weren't healed. Even Chopper could not undo what had happened to them. As bright and upbeat as One Piece usually is, some wounds just don't heal that easily. Hopefully, whatever part of Kuma Vegapunk was able to save will be enough for Bonnie. Either way, being a super powerful artificial intelligence in a world where the most powerful beings are now apparently cyborgs definitely sounds like a mighty threat to the world government. And that's not even including all the other pacifistas running around. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Jack Stansbury, and I hope you have an awesome day.